Friends, Not Masters. A Political Autobiography. Mohammad Ayub Khan, President of Pakistan. Published in 1967. This is a Plisken audiobook presentation dedicated to those who have worked for the building of Pakistan as a progressive and modern state, and to those who have defended it with such distinction. Chapter 9. Foreign Policy. Nobody gives you freedom, you have to fight for it. Nobody fights for you, you have to fight for yourself. Part 1. Pakistani foreign policy has a deep moral content. It is inspired by a consciousness of the equality of all nations, and the right of all peoples to govern themselves according to their ideology. The principal objectives of Pakistan's foreign policy are security and development. The consideration of security embraces the defense of our country and the preservation of our ideology. The requirements of defense are complicated by the fact that we are divided into two parts, separated by a hostile distance of over 1,000 miles. And each part has to be protected within the framework of collective defense. This physical separation underscores the need for welding the peoples of the two parts into a united and indivisible whole. Without complete unity, the security of the country would always remain vulnerable. And since we live in a world of combating philosophies, we have to fight to preserve our ideology, which is the basis of our national existence. The consideration of development springs from the knowledge that survival without development is not possible. Survival cannot be an end in itself, it must have some purpose. Our purpose can be no other than the happiness and progress of our people according to their faith. But these considerations can best be promoted in an atmosphere of peace. This gives us a vested interest in peace generally, and peace in this part of the world particularly. We do not have unlimited resources or unlimited time to make the grade, we must therefore utilize the time and resources available to us in a judicious manner, building up our gains and cutting down our losses. We must develop a national outlook and national policies. The current jargon is independent foreign policy. By independence is meant the freedom to criticize and curse everybody else. Now we cannot afford the luxury of indulging in unbridled criticism of others just to prove our independence. Our foreign policy has to be a national policy which must take into account our vital interests, and operate towards the advancement of those interests. We do not have to indulge in histrionics, we have to be quiet and earnest. The world today is fighting for equality. Equality among individuals as among nations, regardless of whether they are big or small. This requires an unequivocal recognition by the world that every nation is entitled to equal rights and opportunities. The degree of a country's sovereignty and self-respect is not determined by the size of its territory or its resources. This sounds simple enough, and no one would openly contest the claim, yet there are no means to enforce it. It is a world of the big 2, big 3 or 4 or more. It is they who preside over the destinies of the world and determine its direction. The smaller countries, particularly those in the early stages of industrial development, belong to a lower stratum of existence. They have thrown off the yoke of imperialism, but most of them have yet to develop an identity and vision of their own, after sweeping away the cobwebs of colonial influences. We too have to establish our identity, and fight for a position of equality and honor. History has placed us in the pathway of the conflicting interests of major powers. Our location gives us a strategic significance both in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East, but the cause of our major problems is India's inability to reconcile herself to our existence as a sovereign, independent state. The Indian attitude can be explained only in pathological terms. The Indian leaders have a deep hatred for the Muslims, and since they must disclaim and deny it all the time, they are the victims of continual tensions. From the beginning, India was determined to make things difficult for us. The colossal problem of refugee rehabilitation was created by India to cripple our economy. This was accompanied by denying us our share of the assets of undivided India, and the threat of diversion and stoppage of river waters flowing into our territory. Contrary to all agreements and principles, India forcibly occupied a major part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and concentrated her forces there, thus posing a constant threat to our security. At the back of it all was India's ambition to absorb Pakistan, or turn her into a satellite. The Indian leaders made no secret of their designs. Acharya Kripalani, who was president of the Indian National Congress in 1947, declared, Neither did Congress nor the nation has given up its claim of a united India. Sardar V.B. Patel, the first Indian Home Minister and the strong man of the Congress Party, announced at about the same time, "Sooner than later, we shall again be united in common allegiance to our country." From the day of independence, Pakistan was involved in a bitter and prolonged struggle for her very existence and survival. By 1954, Pakistan was compelled to align herself with the West in the interests of her security. She became a member of the Baghdad Pact and the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, both of which were suspect in the communist world. By the time I became responsible for the affairs of the country in 1958, as president, the political identification of the country with the West was complete. As Commander-in-Chief of the Pakistan Army, I was associated with the Baghdad Pact, which after the revolution in Iraq came to be known as CENTO, but my interest was exclusively in terms of the defense of the country. I was anxious to take maximum advantage of this arrangement to build up the defense forces of Pakistan. With the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, I had no direct dealings, and in fact the army was informed only after Pakistan had accepted membership of this organization. I shall go into the genesis of these arrangements later. Here I want to state the precise situation in which I found the country at the time of the revolution in October 1958. India had built up massive military strength by acquiring arms from the Soviet Union, as well as from some Western countries. She had consolidated her hold over the occupied area of Jammu and Kashmir by establishing a reign of terror. Most of the Kashmiri leaders were languishing in jail, and all civil liberties had been completely suppressed. The United Nations no longer seemed interested in having its own resolutions, to which both India and Pakistan were pledged in honor, implemented so as to give the people of Jammu and Kashmir a free and fair opportunity to determine their future. We had few contacts or dealings with the communist world. The Soviet Union regarded us with suspicion and distrust as some kind of a camp follower of the United States. With the People's Republic of China, we were on terms merely of nodding acquaintance. In the Middle East, our position had been compromised by some of our leaders who handled the situation, at the time of the Suez Crisis, in a clumsy fashion. President Nasser, and certain other Arab countries under his influence, thought that we were involved in some deep conspiracy to divide the Arab world. With the Afro-Asian community we had no association, and Africa was a dark continent as far as we were concerned. This then was the picture in October 1958. We could not change all tins overnight, but clearly the whole pattern of our relations with others required fundamental rethinking. Some of the essential dements in our geographical situation had not been recognized, nor was there a clear concept of the nature of the political compulsions to which we would be subjected. It was the force of events which compelled us to undertake this exercise. The earlier years had proved conclusively that the threat from India to our security and existence was both real and constant. Indian efforts in the field of foreign policy were all directed towards one aim: the isolation of Pakistan and its disintegration. I had dealt with the problems created by this threat as the Commander-in-Chief, and I knew the weaknesses and deficiencies in our position. We had done all that we could to convince India that we wanted to live in peace with her, but India could not accept the existence of a strong and independent Muslim state next door. We therefore had to examine our situation dispassionately and realistically and organize our relations with other countries, particularly with our neighbors, in a manner consistent with the needs of our security. Faced with this problem, I was deeply struck by the geopolitical situation of the country. The first question I asked myself was, which are the major countries interested in Pakistan? The exact nature of their interest had then to be identified. The object was to try and evolve a pattern of relationship which would protect the country from any threat of aggression, and give us time to develop the country and unite the people. Take the geographical location first. Here is East Pakistan, surrounded on three sides by India, and the only approach is from the sea, which is not difficult for an enemy to control. West Pakistan is wedged in between three enormous powers, with the Soviet Union at the top, the People's Republic of China in the northeast, and India in the south and Caste. I know of no other small country which has the somewhat dubious distinction of having three such mighty neighbors. Now, this location is a source of weakness in physical terms. but it could be converted into a source of strength if we could establish normal and mutually acceptable relations with the countries hemming us in. With one of them, India, the prospects of establishing normal relations do not appear to be in right. We must therefore accept the situation of implacable Indian hostility and learn to live with it. Then there is the Soviet Union. By joining SEATO and CENTO, we had alienated her and lost her sympathy. Since we had never been a party to any design against her, and our membership of the pacts was dictated solely by the requirements of our security, it should be possible to come to an understanding with the Soviet Union by removing her doubts and misgivings. And then there was the People's Republic of China, fast emerging as a power to be reckoned with. China was making significant progress in all spheres of life, and seemed anxious to have friendly relations with her neighbors. All we had to do was to convince her of our sincerity and friendly intent. From this it was easy to deduce that if we could not establish normal relations with all our three big neighbors, the best thing was to have an understanding with two of them. They might have their internal differences, but we did not need to get involved in that. This was a vital element in our new dunking, to keep clear of the internal disputes and conflicts of other countries, neither to philosophize about their problems, nor to act as busybodies. It was on this basis that I set out to normalize our relations with the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union. It is in this sense that our geographical location, and the political compulsions inherent therein, have determined the course of our foreign policy in recent years. Then there was the necessity of developing the country to provide the people with better living conditions, and through this process bring about greater unity among the people of the two wings. Development presupposes resources, and in our social conditions and our scheme of values, these resources cannot all be generated or mobilized through regimentation. Therefore, we have to look for external assistance to build up the social overheads and provide the initial capital investment. This necessitates our axing good relations with the United States and other Western powers who are in a position to help us economically. Now, any assistance creates certain liabilities. We have to ensure that we do not incur such liabilities as would compromise or damage our national interests. All this must seem an oversimplification. But from our point of view, the approach was rational and pragmatic. The objective was to establish normal relations with the four major powers involved in Asia, without antagonizing any one of them. A simple strategy was evolved to achieve this objective. We should endeavor to set up bilateral equations with each one of them, with the clear understanding that the nature and complexion of the equation should be such as to promote our mutual interests without adversely affecting the legitimate interests of third parties. The merit of this approach was that our people, who believe in honest and straightforward dealings, would be able to appreciate and understand it. I was not unconscious of the pitfalls. No bilateral equation could be established in isolation, other equations would influence its level. In the end, each equation would be determined by the limits of tolerance of third parties. So, each equation would have to be acceptable to third parties, with whom we might be able to establish bilateral relations of mutual benefit. That is where all the complications and difficulties would arise. It would be like walking on a triangular tightrope. It would be vital to determine clearly the limits of tolerance within which bilateral equations might be constructed. To illustrate, the United States would not be too eager to provide us with unlimited economic and military assistance if we were to establish bilateral relations with the major communist powers, without any regard to American interests or strategy in Asia. If we cannot in an unlimited way identify ourselves with American interests, we must learn to do with less than unlimited American assistance. Similarly, we must be able to explain to the United States the extent to which we could go along with them without compromising our own interests. It is not in our interest to alienate the People's Republic of China. Similarly, it is in our interest to develop normal and friendly relations with the Soviet Union. It should be possible to convince the United States that our relations with the People's Republic of China, or with the Soviet Union, are not directed against American interests in Asia. In return for economic assistance, we offer to the United States our goodwill and growing opportunities for collaboration in the field of trade and industry. But we cannot give in return something that would harm a third country. if their global policy is served by our understanding of their problems, and by our not acting against them, well and good. But if the demand goes beyond that, and requires us to do something that is against the interests of another power, then we will have to decline, because that would be going against the interests of Pakistan. I realize that in our new approach such a choice might be forced on us at times. In that event, people in positions of responsibility would have to weigh the alternatives, either to succumb to the pressure of a major power, or to forego whatever assistance might be involved, political, military or economic. The decision would ultimately rest with the people of Pakistan. There is reason to believe that such a situation may not be forced on us if we conduct ourselves with moderation and sobriety. Because of the emergence of China, the earlier polarization between the Soviet Union and the United States is gradually disappearing, and for many years to come, all three of them will be involved in a relentless struggle to create areas of influence for themselves in different countries. None of them can afford to isolate and antagonize any of the developing countries completely. In any case, whether the choice is forced on us or not, the only way in which we can survive is to tell the major powers that we cannot afford to get involved in their squabbles. All we want is to be left alone to work for the security of our country, and the unity and development of our people. We are not in the market for becoming partisans in their struggle for power. Now this approach can be easily confused with the kind of neutralism that India tried to practice during the early 50s, and that came a cropper in the end. There is a fundamental difference. India's neutralism was at best a posture of sitting on the fence, and seeing how best it could take advantage of both sides. At worst it was a kind of sanctimonious hypocrisy, and a subterfuge. For a time, India could get away with it because of its size and strategic position in Asia. India's neutralism was an attempt to act big, and to create a cover for the expansion of her influence. We entertain no such illusions. Our approach is essentially intended to conserve our resources and to cut our commitments. India had set herself up as a beacon light, ranging far and wide, a true guide to errant humanity. She could sustain this pose so long as there was tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. She could act as a bridge between them. As the major powers were engaged in a struggle of their own, and China had yet to discover the Indian mind, it was possible for the Indian leaders to preach philosophy and promote India's designs against her smaller neighbors. I think they overreached themselves, and as time passed, the contradictions between their profession and their practice became more and more difficult to rationalize and explain away. Our approach to world powers and to our neighbors is dictated by a sense of our limitations. We have neither the desire nor the capacity to get mixed up in their wranglings. We are not in a position either to influence their decisions or to solve their problems. The basis of our foreign policy thus is that we stay within our own means, political as well as economic. All we expect is that we should be left alone to deal with our internal affairs, to bring about greater unity among our people, to promote their welfare and to preserve our identity, political and ideological. It is within this framework of understanding that we seek assistance from other countries, and we have no intention of making any demands on them, which would be likely to strain either their willingness or their capacity to help. Our objective is to move into a position where we have to make fewer and fewer demands on them. Neutralism aims at establishing strong bargaining positions. Our concept of developing bilateral relations aims at establishing equations within our resources and limitations and within the resources and limitations of others. We have no intention of bargaining with others. We expect them to help us to the extent they can, and in return, we will help them to the extent we can. It has been suggested that this would mean Pakistan having the minimum of relations with the major powers, and with her neighbors in particular. From there it is argued that if Pakistan were to get into a situation of real trouble, she would find no one willing to come to her rescue. Now I accept that. But we must never forget that we shall have to defend Pakistan ourselves. No other country can be expected to do that on our behalf. That is the basis on which our defense effort and other endeavors should be planned. The major powers have their own problems, and their policies may change with events, and we may be ultimately left entirely alone. That is where our faith in God Almighty must reassure us. It is His law that if an aggressor rears his head in one place, someone equally strong emerges in another place, to frustrate him in his tyrannical designs. Conflicts between nations cannot remain isolated. Should a conflict take place between India and Pakistan, other powers inevitably get drawn into it. But we must develop the capacity and the will to stay the course regardless of what the others may or may not do. Part 2. Having stated the general principles, I shall now try to trace the actual development of the various equations and discuss the problems we had to face in establishing them. I shall deal first with the Indo-Pakistan equation. The background of Indo-Pakistan relations since independence is well known. The last 20 years have been years of frustration for Pakistan in all her attempts to find some level of existence as good neighbors with India. I think political leaders in Pakistan before the revolution tried very hard to come to some understanding with India. The argument from the Indian side has been on the following lines: let us forget our disputes, let us have a no-war pact, let us have more trade, more freedom of movement between the two countries and more cultural exchanges. This will soften feelings on the two sides, and once an atmosphere of goodwill and understanding develops, all problems will resolve themselves. To the Indians this sounds highly plausible, and they often claim, with an air of injured innocence, that their sincere and genuine overtures have met with no response from Pakistan. What is Pakistan's position? It is to ask how goodwill and understanding can develop when basic differences and disputes remain unresolved. If India is willing to enter into a no-war pact with Pakistan, why should she be engaged in building up a tremendous war machine? The Indians reply that their war potential is intended to contain Chinese aggression. How is it then that the type of machine which they are evolving can operate essentially in the plains? How can Pakistan ignore the fact that India is in a position to unleash vast forces against Pakistan at a few hours' notice? In matters of defense, countries do not formulate their policies on the basis of the intentions of others. It is their capability which must be taken into account. If a big country like India has the capability to attack Pakistan, the intentions can always change, pact or no pact. A no-war pact can make sense only if it is accompanied by an agreement about the maintenance of forces at a specified level. We have also to consider how the need for a no-war pact has arisen. It has arisen because of the existence of disputes which can lead to an armed conflict between the two countries. Now, if nothing is done to resolve these conflicts on a just and honorable basis, how does the danger of conflict disappear merely because of the existence of a no-war pact? To make sense, a no-war pact must at least provide reasonable machinery to deal with the disputes and to bring about an honorable solution of those disputes. Such machinery should have the confidence and support of both sides, and must indicate how, in the event of disagreement between the two sides, the issue would be resolved in a peaceful manner, without the reduction of force, and without the provision of any machinery for the solution of problems. A no-war pact would only mean the expression of pious intentions at a given time. In isolation, such a pact would certainly help India to strengthen her claim in the world that she has peaceful intentions. It would certainly not help Pakistan, who can foresee those intentions changing any minute. Finally, the assumption that disputes get resolved with the passage of time is open to serious question. Fundamental disputes affecting the life and freedom of people cannot be swept under the rug, nor do they get buried under the dust of time. They have a habit of erupting because human beings cannot be kept eternally in bondage. This is the point which India, and indeed the world, has to realize when dealing with the problem of the people of Jammu and Kashmir who are engaged in a life-and-death struggle to establish their right of self-determination. And when India says let goodwill grow, and the problems will solve themselves, it gives no assurance that in the meantime, the problems will remain frozen. In fact, all the available evidence shows that the Indians are busy solving the problems on their own terms. A large part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir is under their forcible occupation. They are busy consolidating their occupation. They are changing the complexion of the population of the state. Their thesis, let goodwill grow, means, let's have it our way. There is then the record of previous agreements between India and Pakistan on a number of issues. One has only to go through that record to see in what manner, and to what extent India honored those agreements. I have mentioned how Pakistan was denied her share of assets, finances, stores and ammunition at the time of independence. Each one of these items was governed by an agreement to which both the countries were pledged. There is the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan resolution, dealing with the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, to which both India and Pakistan are parties. Yet every time an attempt is made to implement the resolution, India finds one pretext or another to frustrate it. First she said that conditions in Jammu and Kashmir must be allowed to become normal before the people could be given an opportunity to exercise their right of self-determination. And when conditions returned to normal, she said that now that the situation had settled down, matters should not be disturbed by ascertaining the wishes of the people. This has been the constant pattern of Indian policy. Let things become normal and we will deal with the problem. And now that things are normal, why raise the problem? I had 2 meetings with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, one at Palam Airport, New Delhi on September 1, 1960, and the other when he came to Pakistan to sign the Indus Waters Treaty between 19 and September 23, 1960. The Palam meeting lasted about 2 hours. We issued a joint statement at the end, in which we stressed the need to conduct relations on a rational and planned basis. We also agreed that outstanding issues and problems should be settled in accordance with justice and fair play, in a spirit of friendliness, cooperation, and good neighborliness. Later, while speaking to the press, I suggested that there was need for reappraisal, for forgetting and forgiving, and for a more realistic, rational and sensible relationship with each other. I did not get the impression that Pandit Nehru was extraordinarily pleased to see me, but he was quite moved by some of the suggestions I made to him. He struck me as a tired man, though he still had a reserve of fight and political acumen. I missed the idealism or starry-eyed thinking which is often attributed to him. I told him I considered that relations between India and Pakistan had been dictated by drift rather than by any rational design. The reason, I thought, was that neither side had drawn up any plan for neighborliness. People on both sides thought that all social and economic ills were due to the British, and once they left, everything in the garden would be lovely. Events proved that they were not entirely right, though a good deal of our misfortunes were due to British occupation. Much distress and hatred was generated, and people in both countries began to believe that they should have nothing further to do with each other. I felt it was not too late to formulate a plan to put our relationship on a rational and sensible basis. Pandit Nehru talked of the No-War Declaration. I explained to him that before we entered into any such declaration, there should be an agreement on the setting up of machinery for the solution of outstanding problems, and then that for a no-war declaration to be effective it would be necessary for us to disarm in relation to each other. In military thinking, the crucial factor was capability. If a country had decisive military capability, it could always change its intentions and act aggressively. I reminded him of the concentration of the Indian Army against us in 1950 and again in 1951, when there was hardly any military cause for doing so. I then raised with him the Kashmir problem. I put it to him that it was the people of Kashmir who should have the decisive say in the matter. It was vital that a solution satisfactory from the point of view of the people of Jammu and Kashmir be found. Mr. Nehru did not disagree with my ideas, but emphasized the need for the creation of a background of understanding between the two countries, and for eliminating, as a start, border incidents and firing. We took up the threads during the second meeting in Murree, in September 1961. I again broached the subject of Kashmir. I told him that this was the most propitious moment for settling this dispute, to bring peace to India and Pakistan. He was an accepted leader in India, and perhaps people in Pakistan would be prepared to listen to me too. Such a coincidence might not occur again for a long time, so it would be a great pity if we were to lose this opportunity. Any thought that time would make Pakistan forget the need for an honorable and fair solution to the problem of Jammu and Kashmir was highly unrealistic. The whole country was united on this issue, and no government in Pakistan could possibly forget the problem. I showed him a map of Kashmir and West Pakistan, and how all our major rail and road communications and canal headworks were completely outflanked. The security of Pakistan required a fair solution of the problem. There was also the economic reason now that West Pakistan was dependent on the use of waters of only 3 rivers. Pakistan had to conserve every single ounce of water in these rivers, and that could be done only in the hilly areas of Kashmir. Similarly, the further power requirements of Pakistan could only be met by hydroelectric generation in those areas. For India and Pakistan to live as good neighbors, this problem would have to be solved one day. If it could be solved peacefully and honorably, and in accordance with the commitments of the two governments, both sides would derive enormous advantages. India should then be able to reduce its army by half, and we too should be able to cut down our military expenditure proportionately. On this occasion Pandit Nehru started replying haltingly but with deliberation. He said that the Kashmir problem had become very complicated with the passage of time. Hard positions had been taken up, and it was not easy to go back on them. 2 elections had been held in Kashmir, and a third was in the offing. India had spent an enormous amount of money, apart from military expenditure, on development work in Kashmir. There was also the question of a large Muslim minority in India, which was being integrated. Any hasty action on Kashmir, he thought, would upset this process. India was trying to divert people's energy into constructive channels, and if the status quo was disturbed in Kashmir, people's energy would be diverted into negative channels. I told him that he knew very well the kind of elections that had been held in the state in the absence of any civil liberties. There was no denying the fact that the people of Jammu and Kashmir were most unhappy about the continued occupation of their state by the Indian army. As regards the Muslim minority in India, they could not be held as hostages, and their future did not have to be linked with the problem of Jammu and Kashmir. There was little prospect of the Indian Muslims being integrated into Indian society so long as there was no settlement between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. As regards diverting people's energy into constructive channels, it could only be done if a society had an ideology. We had a considerable argument over this. Nehru finally asked what, accepting the fact that there was need for peace between the two countries, and also that the room for maneuver for settlement of the Kashmir dispute was limited, I thought should be our first step. I told him that this would depend on the objective we had before us. Once the objective was determined, an organization could be established to work out the method. Mr. Nehru said that he foresaw serious political opposition in his country. He mentioned that Indian public opinion had reacted violently to Chinese occupation of Indian territory. I could not see the relevance since Kashmir had never been Indian territory, and was the subject of an international dispute on which the two countries were pledged to a solution, in accordance with a United Nations resolution. I did not get the impression that Nehru was interested in any long-term and lasting solution. He was perhaps not averse to the dialogue going on for the time being, but he was not visualizing a future of understanding between the two countries. Had he been interested in such a future, I think he would have given more serious thought, for example, to the proposal for joint defense which I made in May 1959. For some odd reason, he thought it was an attack on India's integrity and self-respect. There was nothing sinister in the proposal, nor was I the first one to have made it. The Quaid-e-Azam thought that it was of vital importance to Pakistan and India, as independent sovereign states, to collaborate in a friendly way jointly to defend their frontiers both on land and sea, against any aggression. Dr. Eric Streif, special correspondent of the New Zürcher Zeitung, Zurich, reported in Dawn Karachi, March 12, 1948, had asked the Quaid-e-Azam, in international affairs, will Pakistan and India work jointly, and also join hands for the defense of their borders, both land and sea, and cooperate against any outright aggression? The Quaid-e-Azam replied, "Personally, I have no doubt in my mind that our own paramount interests demand that the Dominion of Pakistan and the Dominion of India should coordinate for the purpose of playing their part in international affairs, and the developments that may take places. And also it is of vital importance to Pakistan and India, as independent sovereign states, to collaborate in a friendly way jointly, to defend their frontiers, both on land and sea, against any aggression. But this depends entirely on whether Pakistan and India can resolve their own differences and grave, domestic issues in the first instance. In other words, if we can put our house in order internally, then we may be able to play a very great part externally in all international affairs." In April 1953, Muhammad Ali Bogra, who was then Prime Minister of Pakistan, declared that, once outstanding disputes between the two countries had been settled and a suitable climate created, joint defense of India and Pakistan could be advantageously considered by the two countries. He added that through joint defense both countries would be able to save a lot of defense expenditure, which we could usefully employ for the national good, and for raising the standard of living of the masses. On April 24, 1959, I said that in the case of external aggression, both India and Pakistan should come together to defend the subcontinent. The Indian leaders thought that I was suggesting some kind of a defense pact, and their reaction was one of fright and distrust. A few days later in Quetta, I clarified my proposal, explaining that it did not mean any special type of pact about which India need be so perturbed. What I had in mind was a general understanding for peace between the two countries. I emphasized that the prerequisite for such an understanding was the solution of big problems like Kashmir and the canal waters. Once these were resolved, the armies of the two countries could disengage and move to their respective vulnerable frontiers. This would give us the substance of joint defense, that is, freedom from fear of each other, and freedom to protect our respective frontiers. Mr. Nehru deliberately chose to misunderstand the proposal, and declared in the Lok Sabha, on May 4, 1959, "We do not propose to have a military alliance with any country, come what may." He elaborated this by saying, "I am all for settling our troubles with Pakistan and living normal, friendly and neighborly lives. But we do not want to have a common defense policy, which is almost some kind of a military alliance. I do not understand against whom people talk about common defense policies. Are we to become members of the Baghdad Pact or SEATO or somebody else?" Later, in January 1960, Mr. Nehru, while speaking at the annual Congress Party meeting in Bangalore, asked, "What does the military pact mean? Does it mean that armies must march across India?" He then added with some heat, "Whatever the consequences, India would never allow foreign armies on her soil even for her defense." What Mr. Nehru missed completely was that I was neither suggesting any change in the foreign policies of the two countries, nor any formal defense arrangement. His vision of Pakistan armies marching over Indian soil, on the pretext of defending India's borders, was essentially intended to divert public opinion from the real issue, which was to come to a settlement on outstanding disputes, and to live on peaceful terms. I kept coming back to this proposal, and clarifying it more and more to enable the people of India to recognize its merits. I first tried to assure the Indian leaders that the proposal did not violate the non-alignment policy professed by India. The crux of the proposal, I stated in unequivocal terms, was that once differences between the two nations were resolved, the Indian and Pakistani forces, then facing each other, could be released to defend their respective territories. The Indian Prime Minister, however, refused to see any merit in resolving disputes with Pakistan or living at peace with her. The two countries had been locked in confrontation ever since independence, and their armies were facing each other in Kashmir, and on the international borders between India and Pakistan. My proposal was intended to bring home the fact that these armies were in the wrong place. Once the disputes were resolved, they could go to their right positions and the people of India and Pakistan would be rid of the fear of each other. There was also in the proposal the inherent possibility that some understanding could be arrived at, to ensure that if either country was engaged in war with some third power, she would not have the apprehension of being stabbed in the back by the other. It was not the Indian Prime Minister alone who chose to misunderstand the proposal. There were people in Pakistan, too, who thought it might lead to some kind of a confederation between India and Pakistan. How they came to such a conclusion was beyond me. Only those who had neither knowledge nor appreciation of history could think on these lines. India and Pakistan could never work as a confederation, even if such an arrangement were to be brought about by force. And the reason is simple. Indian nationalism is based on Hinduism, and Pakistani's nationalism is based on Islam. The two philosophies are fundamentally different from each other. These two nationalisms cannot combine, but it should be possible for them to live side by side in peace and understanding. This is our foreign policy objective towards India. Those who talk of confederation ignore the past history and the temperament of the people, their whole ideology and philosophy. When Sheikh Abdullah and Mirza Afzal Beg came to Pakistan in 1964, they too had brought the absurd, proposal of confederation between India, Pakistan and Kashmir. I told them plainly we should have nothing to do with it. It was curious that whereas we were seeking the salvation of Kashmiris, they had been forced to mention an idea which, if pursued, would lead to our enslavement. It was clear that this was what Mr. Nehru had told them to say to us. I did not blame them, because they were obviously acting under the compulsion of circumstances, but they left me in no doubt that their future was linked with Pakistan. I think Pandit Nehru and his people could not believe that I had put forward the proposal in all sincerity. They might have thought I was trying to get a solution of Kashmir on the cheap. What they did not realize was that I was thinking in terms of establishing a long-term basis for peace between the two countries. Of course, I wanted the future of the people of Jammu and Kashmir to be decided according to their wishes. But I also wanted a change in India's aggressive attitude and hostility towards Pakistan. I was working for coexistence, for relaxation, and for understanding. That was not to be. History had offered India and Pakistan a great opportunity. It was missed because the Indian leaders felt they must go on arming themselves regardless of the ruinous burden they were imposing on their people. They decided that they must have not one army but in fact two armies, one for their wars with China and the ether to intimidate Pakistan, and other smaller neighbors of India. The equation between the two countries, instead of stabilizing at a certain level, was thus destined to have a disturbed and violent future. Part 3. The equation between the United States of America and Pakistan has then one of close friendship and alliance. This equation was firmly established by the time I became president. I was certainly associated with those elements in it which had a direct bearing on the defense services, but the essential content was determined by the political leaders. My own thinking, at that time, was that it was natural for the United States to be deeply interested in the welfare and safety of smaller powers in Asia. My reasoning was that the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, and even India, in spite of her serious internal weaknesses, would like to create and extend their spheres of influence, and it was unlikely that they would be able to agree on the kind and extent of influence that each one of them should exercise. They would, however, be agreed on one thing, and that was not to let the United States, an offshore power, have any permanent foothold in Asia. Now, wedged in between these three big countries are a number of small nations starting from Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and extending to Nepal, Burma, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines and Korea. These are strips of geography caught between masses of land, and their main concern, quite naturally, is their own security. It was not unreasonable to assume that these smaller nations would be looking for such friends as might help them in protecting themselves. Assuming that the United States, too, wanted to have an area of influence in Asia, it was logical for her to present herself as a natural friend to countries like Pakistan. For some time the United States' policy conformed to this line of thinking, but with the emergence of the People's Republic of China as an Asian power, and, more particularly, after the conflict between India and China over the question of border demarcation, the United States' thinking and policies in Asia underwent a complete and fundamental change. The United States thinkers and planners developed an anxiety to build up certain countries in Asia as bulwarks against China. They selected Japan and India for this purpose. Building up India meant providing her with vast quantities of military hardware, which naturally created a sense of apprehension among her smaller neighbors. Since Pakistan was regarded by India as her enemy number one, Pakistan was the first to be affected by the change in American policy. To understand the exact significance of this change was necessary to go over the history of Pakistan-United States relations. Pakistan became an ally of the West in May 1954, when the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement with the United States was signed. Later that year Pakistan became a member of SEATO, along with the United States, Britain, France, Thailand, the Philippines, Australia and New Zealand. A year later, Pakistan joined the Baghdad Pact, another mutual defense organization, with Britain, Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. The United States did not join this organization, but remained closely associated with it from its inception. In 1958, when Iraq left this pact, it was renamed CENTO, Central Treaty Organization. It continued to comprise Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan as its regional members. Early in 1959, Pakistan signed, as did Turkey and Iran. a bilateral agreement of cooperation with the United States which was designed further to reinforce the defensive purposes of CENTO. Thus Pakistan was associated with the United States through not one, but 4 mutual security arrangements. In this sense, she was sometimes regarded as America's most allied ally in Asia. She was the only Asian country to join both CETO and CENTO. Pakistan came in for bitter criticism from India when she joined these alliances. India charged that by so doing, Pakistan had brought the Cold War to the subcontinent. The real purpose of the Indian outcry became clear, however, as time advanced, and more particularly when in 1959 Pakistan signed the bilateral agreement of cooperation with the United States of America. According to this agreement, the United States was required, under certain circumstances, to assist Pakistan if she became the victim of aggression. India demanded and, according to Mr. Nehru, received a specific assurance from Washington that this agreement could not be used against India. Shorn of sophistry, this demand amounted to seeking an assurance that if India should commit aggression against Pakistan, the United States would not come to the assistance of Pakistan under this agreement. There could not be a more illuminating commentary on India's historic attitude towards Pakistan. This attitude also explains why India has throughout opposed the grant of military aid to Pakistan. Not that she feared Pakistan; after all, India is 5 times her size, and Indian armed forces are 4 times the size of Pakistani forces. In actual fact, the military aid to Pakistan was designed to provide merely a deterrent force. There was no question, therefore, of Pakistan posing any kind of threat to India. I have spoken of India's hostility to Pakistan's alliance with the United States. She had resorted earlier to direct pressure to try to prevent Pakistan from joining it. In August 1953, after bilateral negotiations lasting some months, Nehru and Mohammad Ali Bogra, Pakistan's Prime Minister at that time, issued a joint communiqué on Kashmir. In it, they agreed that it was their firm opinion that this Kashmir dispute should be settled in accordance with the wishes of the people of that state. The most feasible way of ascertaining the wishes of the people was by fair and impartial plebiscite. Further, it was decided that the plebiscite administrator should be appointed by the end of April 1954. He would then make such proposals as he thought proper for preparations to be made for the holding of a fair and impartial plebiscite in the entire state. Shortly after this, Nehru got wind of the fact that Pakistan was likely to enter into alliance with the United States, and receive military aid from that country. In a protracted and strongly worded letter, he indicated that if Pakistan went ahead with the project, the Indo-Pakistan Agreement on Kashmir would lapse. Muhammad Ali replied that he did not see why any military assistance that Pakistan might receive from the United States for purely defensive purposes should make it less imperative for them to improve India-Pakistan relations by settling the Kashmir dispute. In particular, he did not see why, if Pakistan joined an alliance with the United States, this should disqualify the people of Kashmir from exercising their right, which the United Nations, India and Pakistan had acknowledged, to a free vote to decide whether their state should accede to India or Pakistan. In December 1953, although Pakistan had not by then either entered into any pact with the United States or received any military assistance, Mr. Nehru indicated that he could not go forward with the agreements set out in the joint communiqué on Kashmir, because the whole context in which these agreements were made will change if military aid comes to Pakistan from America. Obviously, Pakistan could not allow Mr. Nehru to dictate her foreign policy. In May 1954, Pakistan went ahead with the signing of the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement with the United States. From that point on, the fact that the Indian Prime Minister would repudiate the joint communiqué on Kashmir became a foregone conclusion. Pakistan's efforts to save it eventually collapsed when the two Prime Ministers met for the last time in May 1955. In that same year, the alliance with the United States came under still heavier pressure. The Soviet Union reacted when, in 1955, Pakistan joined the Baghdad Pact, now CENTO. Up to that time, the Soviet Union had maintained a neutral stand on the Kashmir dispute. Its representatives had abstained from voting whenever the issue came up in the Security Council. But now the Soviet Union charged that, by joining the Baghdad Pact, Pakistan had become a member of an aggressive Western alliance, and it responded by radically altering its stand on Kashmir. Thenceforth, the Soviet Union began to subscribe to India's claim that no plebiscite was possible or necessary in Kashmir, and that Kashmir was an integral part of India. In contrast, over the last decade, the policies of the United States have undergone a change which has operated progressively, to the disadvantage of her ally, Pakistan vis-à-vis neutral India. When we first joined the alliance with the United States, neutralism, non-alignment as India prefers to call it, was suspect in American eyes. It was in fact regarded as immoral. It was another name for playing both sides of the street. Over the years it has come to assume a mantle of respectability in American eyes. Indeed, in the late 50s it gradually began to be actively supported, in some cases in competition against the Soviet Union. In particular, influential American circles began to advocate massive aid to India. At the same time there grew a feeling among the allies of the United States, not in Pakistan only, that, in a variety of ways, they were increasingly being taken for granted. Gradually, as a result of this change in American thinking, neutral India became by far the largest recipient of U.S. economic aid, while she continued freely to castigate the United States in the United Nations and outside, whenever opportunity offered. Pakistan watched this transformation in American foreign policy with increasing perplexity and dismay. Our concern arose from the fact that the Indian military build-up was aimed largely against Pakistan. The pronouncements of Indian leaders and the continuing massing of India's army on Pakistan's borders clearly suggested that. Until 1962, however, the polity of the United States continued to distinguish between a non-aligned India and the American ally, Pakistan, although under a mutual defense assistance agreement signed in 1951, reaffirmed in 1958, India also was receiving military aid from the United States, without accepting any of the obligations that devolve on an ally. American policy continued generally to maintain, in the matter of direct military aid, a substantial difference between an ally and a neutral. However, this distinction between Pakistan and non-aligned India disappeared after the border disputes between India and China, which flared up into an armed clash in 1962. Despite the fact that over the decade the distinction in American eyes between an ally and a neutral had become increasingly blurred, Pakistan continued steadily to stand by the alliance. Our view has been that, so long as we were in this alliance, we must continue honorably to discharge, as far as we could, whatever obligations devolved on us as a member. In 1963, however, Pakistan received a new cause for disillusionment with American foreign policy. Following the India-China border clash, the United States proceeded to rush arms to India on a scale which to us seemed totally unjustified by the requirements of the situation. Since then, arms aid has been flowing into India continuously on a very substantial scale, not only from the United States, but also in equal measure from Britain, and to a smaller extent, from some other members of the Commonwealth. People in the United States sometimes ask, is not the military assistance given to India by the USA meant exclusively for fighting Communist China? Has not India pledged that she will not use these arms against Pakistan? Have not the United States and Great Britain also given assurances that if India employed these weapons in an aggression against Pakistan, they would act to thwart the aggression? Are not these assurances, they ask, sufficient to protect Pakistan against the possible misuse of Western arms against her? Before I proceed to answer these questions, let me briefly recapitulate the facts leading up to the Western policy of arming India. On October 12, 1962, Mr. Nehru announced that he had instructed the Indian Army to throw the Chinese out of the disputed areas. This announcement was described by the New York Herald Tribune 15 October as tantamount to a formal declaration of war, while the British newspaper The Guardian called it an ultimatum. That the Indians fired the first shot was suggested by a subsequent report in the New York Times of 2 April 1963, which mentioned that General Maxwell D. Taylor, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, indicated in secret congressional testimony made public here today, that India might have started the border fight with Communist China. On October 20, 1962, fighting flared up between China and India, at a number of points along their disputed border in Ladakh, Kashmir, and in the Northeast Frontier Agency, NEFA, area, lying east of the state of Bhutan. What happened subsequently is, however, fairly generally known. During two brief bouts of fighting, the first in October and the second in November, the Indian army met with serious reverses. By 20 November the Indians had surrendered another 2,000 square miles of disputed territory in Ladakh, thus putting the Chinese in control of almost the entire 15,000 square miles of territory, which they claimed in that part of Kashmir. In the Nefa area, the military rout of the Indian forces assumed even more serious proportions. By 20 November, not only the entire disputed Nefa territory but even Assam seemed exposed to the rapidly advancing Chinese forces. Then suddenly, on 21 November, the Chinese declared a ceasefire and offered unilaterally to withdraw to points behind the McMahon line, from the entire territory they had overrun. This undertaking they subsequently fully carried out, offering at the same time to negotiate their border differences with India peacefully. Since then there has been no significant military incident on any part of the entire disputed border. At Nassau, on December 29, 1962, long after the ceasefire on the India-China border, the United States and Britain decided to continue to supply India on an emergency basis, with up to $120 million worth of military aid. The program included a variety of military equipment, but its central feature was the arming of 6 Indian divisions for mountain warfare. Arising also from the Nassau decision, a United States-British-Canadian air mission visited India to examine what would be India's air needs, should China attack again. And another US mission went out to India to study the question of how to expand India's arms production capacity. Subsequently, on June 30, 1963, at Birch Grove, the United States and Britain decided on a further substantial program of military aid to India, over and above that agreed at Nassau. Apart from additional arms, this program provided for extensive radar communications, air transport and training facilities, as well as for American and British assistance to expand greatly India's own armament production. India has also been assured that there is no need for her to enter an alliance with the West in order to continue to qualify for military assistance against China. Indeed, she has been given to understand that it is in the Western interest that she should continue to remain non-aligned and receive military aid from the Soviet Union as well. Taking advantage of this favorable Western response, India decided to raise her standing army from 11 to 22 divisions as rapidly as possible, and to expand substantially her air force and navy, all ostensibly for use against China. Let us first examine briefly whether the arming of India on this extensive scale is necessary or justified. The American-British military aid program to India was originally put in motion at a time when the West feared that the India-China conflict might escalate into a major war. From the very outset it has been our view that the fighting was only in the nature of a border conflict. On November 5, 1962, after the first India-China clash, I made a statement to that effect, and expressed concern over the Western decision to rush military aid to India, on a scale based apparently on an assumption that India was faced with a major war with China. There was no valid basis for this assumption. It made no sense militarily, I said, that China should have decided to launch an invasion of India over the Himalayas at the height of winter. Under the circumstances it seemed logical to conclude that the Chinese objectives were limited. Later, when I visited China, the highest authority in the country told me that the Sino-Indian conflict on the Tibetan border was the direct outcome of Indian military provocations. A stage had been reached when their premier and the chief of could bear it no longer. They therefore decided to hit back. Subsequent events have proved that the Chinese had no plan to embark on a major attack on India. Since then, the Chinese have demonstrated their willingness to settle the dispute peacefully. The Indians, on their part, are anxious to avoid any further fighting with China and have been working steadily for a peaceful settlement. Yet India continues to demand, and receive, an increasing amount of military assistance. India currently presents 3 faces to the world, one to the West, simulating a resolve to fight China in order to secure the maximum of Western arms assistance, a second to the Soviet Union stressing her resolve, nevertheless, to remain non-aligned, and a third to China seeking a peaceful settlement of the dispute by secret peace overtures through neutral emissaries. It is my belief that the Sino-Indian dispute can and will be resolved peacefully. Therefore, the continuance of military aid to India is unjustified. Even in the unlikely event of a recrudescence of border fighting between China and India, the Indians could not, considering the mountain terrain, deploy more than 3 to 4 divisions against the Chinese. One may justifiably ask then, why is India doubling the size of her standing army to 22 divisions, even allowing for the necessary reserves? Who are the remaining divisions aimed against? The fact of the matter is that, taking advantage of the favorable Western response to her demands for arms, India is planning to raise 2 armies, one with which to face China, and the other to use against Pakistan and her other smaller neighbors, in pursuance of her expansionist objectives. Any army meant for China would by the nature of things be so positioned as to be able to wheel round swiftly to attack East Pakistan. Thus both the armies pose a grave threat to Pakistan. Having built up this enormous war machine, India's leadership would need to justify the great hardships it had imposed on the Indian people in the process. It might also want to regain face, which it lost in the fighting with China. It was possible therefore that India might decide to do so, as soon as a suitable opportunity offered itself, by throwing her massive armor against Pakistan, and possibly striking in the first instance against that part of Kashmir which is under Pakistan's control, but which India claims to be Indian territory. I have tried to recapitulate the events which put under strain the Pakistan-United States equation. It was clear to me even at the time of the Kennedy-Nixon presidential contest, that the United States was out to appease India, and to get her in its orbit of political influence by all possible means. If Pakistan did not feel happy about it, it was just too bad, and there was nothing that the United States could do. At the invitation of President Kennedy, I had visited the United States in July 1961. President Kennedy said in his welcome address that Pakistan was a friend of immediacy and constancy. He also observed that Americans in private and in their public life appreciate the value of friendship and the constancy of friends. I was heartened by this because the value of friendship rests on reciprocity. I addressed a joint session of the Congress of the United States on July 12, 1961. I explained at some length the basis of the partition of the subcontinent. Our demand for a homeland of our own was based on the realization that we would have no place worth the name in a society which was governed by a rigid caste system. The demand was not based on bigotry or intolerance. It was, in fact, an escape from the bigotry and intolerance to which we had been subjected for decades in the Indian society. We were not wanting to create a priest-ridden society, but a liberal and enlightened one in which we should be able to live according to our own ideology and faith. In our society there would be no place for color prejudice or race prejudice. We people are, shall we say, color-blind and race-blind. I reminded the Congress of their responsibilities and world obligations. There was applause when I said, "The only people who will stand by you are the people of Pakistan," but before the applause died down I added, provided you are also prepared to stand by them. So I would like you to remember that, whatever may be the dictates of your commitments, you will not take any steps that might aggravate our problems, or in any fashion jeopardize our security. And as long as you remember that, I have no doubt in my mind that our friendship will grow in strength. Throughout my visit, I emphasized the need for bringing about a just and honorable settlement of the Kashmir dispute, without which there could be no peace in the subcontinent. I urged the United States to use their growing influence in India to persuade the Indian leaders to realize the value of living at peace with Pakistan. I was asked by a pressman how far President Kennedy could go in persuading Mr. Nehru to resolve the Kashmir dispute. My answer was, "We will see how far he can go. He should be able to go a long way." A few days earlier I had a luncheon meeting with the National Press Club in Washington. One of the questions put to me there was, how would Pakistan react if arms aid was given to India? I said, "We have made our position clear to the United States and indeed to the whole world. We want to live at peace with India. We are stuck on Kashmir. The problem of Kashmir involves the feelings and wishes of the people of Kashmir. It is also a manifestation of India's hostility towards Pakistan. Apart from that, there are considerations of economy and security. India does not seem prepared to have peace with Pakistan. India's armed forces are 3 times our strength, out of which no more than 15% can really face China. The rest are poised against Pakistan. In a situation of Till's kind, if any arms aid is given to India, Pakistan would feel insecure, and there would be a tremendous groundswell of public opinion in Pakistan against such a move. And it will put a tremendous strain on our friendship with the United States. In my meetings with President Kennedy, I tried to impress upon him that the situation in the subcontinent could not become stable so long as India and Pakistan remained on inimical terms over Kashmir. I suggested to him that the US administration was in a decisive position to exert a healthy influence on India in this matter, and that their policy objectives could not be achieved unless there was peace in the Indian subcontinent. I also asked President Kennedy about the shift in American policy towards non-aligned countries and how it would affect PACs like CENTO and CETO. I told him that regional members would find it difficult to justify their membership of these PACs in view of the change in American attitude. President Kennedy assured me that he was acutely conscious of the need for collective security. He felt that he had not been correctly understood on the question of aid to neutrals. He was not thinking in terms of abandoning friends and embracing neutrals. All he had in mind was that neutrals should not be treated as enemies. He particularly wanted to know how CETO and CENTO could be strengthened, and how the United States could be of assistance in helping to settle the disputes between India and Pakistan. I also asked him about the US administration's intentions to enlarge the scope of the Mutual Security Act to include neutral countries. Would that mean giving arms aid to India? I left him in no doubt that such a move would have serious repercussions on public opinion in Pakistan. Already people, not only in Pakistan but from Korea to Turkey, had started wondering whether the United States could distinguish between friends and those who were not friends. I was assured that no thin G would be done which might create difficulties for us, and that we would be consulted before any military aid was given to neutral countries under the amended Act. I described to President Kennedy the background of the Kashmir dispute at some length. While India and Pakistan faced each other with loaded guns, essential development remained insufficiently cared for. If this dispute could be resolved, it would be a great service not only to this region, but to the whole world. I told him of my meeting with Nehru in London, in May 1960. Nehru had not been particularly responsive when I raised the question of Kashmir with him. I had told Mr. Nehru then that there was a general belief that his attitude towards Kashmir was governed by certain emotional considerations. He had replied that if that were so, the valley could be turned into a kind of Switzerland for him to visit as often as he chose. He also added that his mother came from Lahore, yet he had no emotional involvement with the place. It was obvious, I told President Kennedy, that Nehru was exploiting the fact that he was in forcible occupation of a large part of Jammu and Kashmir, and that to him that was the end of the matter. The point I was trying to get across was that arms assistance to India would only encourage her to remain in occupation of areas which did not belong to her, and the prospects of any just settlement of the dispute would be eliminated. President Kennedy agreed with me that there was urgent need for a solution of the Kashmir problem. But he seemed to think that he was not in a position to play an active and direct role in the matter. He struck me as a preoccupied and lonely man. He had not been long in office and seemed under considerable strain, perhaps because of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He seemed unsure of his grasp of things, and I could see that he was surrounded by too many theoreticians, who are useful people to have, but can sometimes divert one from the right and practical course of action. You need to have hard-headed, realistic, and experienced men around you, particularly in times of crisis. President Kennedy mentioned to me that he would like to have a half-hour talk alone with me. He took me by the arm and led me to a seat under a tree on the lawns of the White House. When we sat down, he spoke of the Berlin situation, and asked me what I would do in similar circumstances. Obviously he did not expect me to give him a solution. All he wanted was to talk about a matter which was causing him considerable worry. I came away with the impression that he was under great stress, and could not really open his heart to anyone. I returned from the United States satisfied in the sense that I had put across my point of view to President Kennedy without any reservation. I could only hope that the United States would realize the dangers inherent in allowing the Kashmir dispute to remain unresolved and would not embark on large-scale supply of arms to India in a hurry. The United States at that time was beginning to show some concern about the agreement for oil exploration, which we were negotiating with the Soviet Union, and the prospects of demarcation of the boundary between Pakistan and China. My position on both these issues was that in view of the changing situation, it was important for us to normalize our relations with the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. We could not afford to carry unnecessary political burdens. I have mentioned above certain events during the Sino-Indian conflict in 1962. I think it is necessary to trace the development in greater detail, in order to show how the United States reacted to the situation, and how we came to a gradual and painful realization that as between India and Pakistan, the United States had chosen India. The Chinese authorities in Tibet issued an order in July 1959, declaring both Indian and Tibetan currencies illegal. Indian nationals were advised not to enter Tibet in the interest of their own safety. In August 1959, a Chinese force occupied the border post of Longju on the Assam-Tibet border. They also occupied another post in Ladakh. This was followed by an exchange of protest notes between India and China. In November 1959, Nehru declared, "I want to disabuse any suspicion that might lurk in some people's minds that we will not be able to defend our integrity if the Chinese invade us. We have confidence in our strength and determination to meet this challenge, and we will meet it with our full strength." Mr. Zhou Enlai suggested to Mr. Nehru that both sides should withdraw their troops 20 kilometers along the entire length of the 2,500-mile border, thus creating a 25-mile demilitarized zone pending a friendly settlement of the boundary question. Mr. Nehru rejected the proposal. The Chinese government, however, issued orders to its frontier units to stop sending out patrols in order to avoid incidents. In April 1960, there was a meeting between Mr. Nehru and Mr. Zhou Enlai in New Delhi, but the talks did not resolve the differences. There followed a series of meetings at the official level. In March 1961, some Chinese nationals were ordered to leave India. Throughout 1961, the relationship between China and India remained under considerable strain. Nehru was beginning to adopt a belligerent attitude. Both sides complained of violations of their airspace and territory. Mr. Krishna Menon, who was defense minister, stated in the Lok Sabha on April 11, 1961, that the Indian government had taken all necessary steps to defend the Himalayan borders, and that the idea that communist invaders could just walk in at any time was no longer true. In July 1962, there were two other border incidents. In September 1962, the Chinese proposed once again that the armed forces of both sides should withdraw 20 kilometers along the entire border in order to ease tension. The proposal was again rejected by India. Towards the middle of September 1962, there were further border clashes at the eastern end of the Himalayan frontier. The Nefer border remained quiet until 30 October, when a serious clash took place at the extreme western end of the McMahon line. On 13 October, the Chinese again called upon Nehru to pull back from the brink of the precipice, as according to them, China was absolutely unwilling to cross swords with India. A week later there was serious fighting in Ladakh. The Chinese did not advance in Ladakh beyond the line claimed by them. In the Nefer, the Chinese overwhelmed two outposts. Their attack then developed into a general offensive at both ends of the McMahon line. In 3 days the Chinese forces covered some 90 miles, capturing Selapas and Bomdila. The Chinese government announced a unilateral ceasefire on November 21, 1962, and started withdrawing their forces to positions 20 kilometers behind the line of actual control, which existed between India and China, on November 7, 1959. President Kennedy wrote me a letter on October 28, 1962. He expressed alarm at the situation which had arisen as a result of the Sino-Indian conflict, and informed me that the United States intended to give the Indians what help they could for India's immediate needs, and to ensure that whatever help they gave to India would be used only against the Chinese. He argued that Pakistan was in a position to make an important move which, according to him, only Pakistan could make, and that was to signal to the Indians in a quiet but effective way that the concern, which President Kennedy himself thought totally unjustified, but which had led the Indians to maintain the greater part of their military power on their borders with Pakistan, should be put aside in that crisis. He suggested that perhaps an effective way would be a private message from me to Nehru telling him that he could count on Pakistan's taking no action on the frontiers to alarm India. President Kennedy emphasized that no possible outside aid could increase the ability of the Indians to withstand the Chinese offensive, as much as a shift in their own dispositions. He said he knew the history of Kashmir, and was not making the suggestion lightly. He did so in the hope and belief that the painful moments which India was then experiencing would teach them how much more important the threat from the north, as he put it, was to the whole of the subcontinent than any regional quarrels within it. He assured me that action taken by me in the larger interests of the subcontinent would do more in the long run to bring about a sensible resolution of Pakistan-India differences than anything else he could think of. I give below in full the reply which I sent to President Kennedy on November 5, 1962. Dear Mr. President, I am grateful to you for your kind message of October 28, 1962, which was delivered by your ambassador. For the last 15 years India has posed a major military threat to Pakistan. She has built up her forces, may I say, mainly with American and British equipment 3 to 4 times our strength, and has openly declared that Pakistan is her enemy number one. 80% or more of her armed forces have already been earmarked against us, and the bulk of them remain concentrated on our borders on 10 days' state of readiness. We have been exposed to these aggressive designs all these years simply because the Indian Prime Minister himself is not prepared to honor his pledge in regard to so many agreements, and especially in regard to the solution of Kashmir, in which Pakistan is vitally interested for profound economic and security reasons. Therefore, by and large, we have spent these 15 years in a state of mobilization, which has been forced upon us by India. On top of all this, the recent conflict between India and China has led to developments of grave concern to us. However, our own information, although meager, leads us to believe that the Chinese intention seems to be to occupy the territory which they believe belongs to them, and over which there has been a dispute between her and India. Even Mr. Nehru thought it fit in his wisdom to declare in the Indian Parliament in 1954, with reference to the Chinese position in Tibet, that I am not aware of any time during the last few hundred years when Chinese sovereignty, or if you like suzerainty, was challenged by any outside country. All during this period, whether China was weak or strong, or whatever the government of China, China always maintained its claim to sovereignty over Tibet. The British Empire in the days of Lord Curzon had expanded into and made several types of arrangements in Tibet. Now, it is impossible or improper for us to continue any such arrangements. These maps and treaties are all prepared by the British imperialists. These treaties and maps are intended to show that we must act as they did. Militarily, however, we do not believe that China can bring to bear against India her major forces through the difficult terrain of the Himalayas to achieve decisive results, and even if she has any such intention, the way to do it would be to outflank India through Burma. In our opinion, that would be a simpler way of doing it, and in cost it would be cheaper. If the Chinese intentions were more than limited, and they were to expand into the territories of Assam, would have as much cause for concern as India, as our East Pakistan would be directly affected. We are making this appreciation about the actual situation in no light-hearted mood. Why has such a situation developed on this subcontinent and around India? We believe that this is the direct outcome of distorted and fallacious thinking on the part of Mr. Nehru and his associates, and a consequence of a baseless foreign policy that he has been following. This foreign policy has been based on the following factors: A. Bending over backwards to appease communism. B. Hoist the white flag of neutralism to appease communism and get other wavering nations to join India in order to be able to create a world nuisance value for themselves. C. Intimidate and threaten Pakistan in order to politically isolate it, and economically weaken it, and D. Abuse the West, and especially the USA in season and out of season. The events have proved that all that is happening to Mr. Nehru is the direct consequence of this warped thinking. We have been warning and pointing to this all along, Mr. President. What you now ask of us is to give an assurance to Mr. Nehru of a land that will enable him to deploy his troops, at present concentrated against us, elsewhere. I am surprised that such a request is being made to us. After all, what we have been doing is nothing but to contain the threat that was continuously posed by India to us. Is it in conformity with human nature that we should cease to take such steps as are necessary for our self-preservation? Or will our own people ever accept such a position? According to our information, India has withdrawn an infantry division and a half away from us, but there are definite indications that they are moving forward, their reserve armored formations of 1 division and 1 brigade to battle locations against Pakistan. Similarly, they now have a corps headquarters to control troops deployed against East Pakistan. The bulk of their navy, barring a couple of small vessels, have been concentrated in Bombay Harbour, ostensibly for reft but in reality to pose a threat to us. Under no stretch of imagination, Mr. President, can these moves be described as indications of peaceful intentions towards us by India? So how can we, in a situation like this, be expected to show our friendship to them? No, Mr. President, the answer to this problem lies elsewhere. It lies in creating a situation whereby we are free from the Indian threat, and the Indians are free from any apprehensions about us. This can only be done if there is a settlement of the question of Kashmir. This matter is sometimes stated as very difficult to resolve. I do not agree with that. I believe that if there is a change of heart on the part of India, it should not be difficult to find an equitable and an honourable settlement. Our object is to have peace, and especially with our neighbours. I am very grateful for the assurance you have given, that the arms you are now supplying to India will not be used against us. This is very generous of you, but knowing the sort of people you are dealing with, whose history is a continuous tale of broken pledges, I would not ask a friend like you to place yourself in an embarrassing situation. India's conduct over the question of Junagadh, Mongrel, Hyderabad, Kashmir, and Goa should be well known to you. Our belief is that the arms now being obtained by India from you for use against China will undoubtedly be used against us at the very first opportunity. However, in the light of the promise that you were good enough to make, namely, that we shall be consulted, before you gave any military assistance to India, we did expect to be consulted, and also informed as to the types and the quantities of weapons and equipment which are now in the process of being supplied to them. It is regrettable that none of this has been done. I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that although India today poses as an aggrieved and oppressed party, in reality she has been constantly threatening and intimidating, in varying degrees, small neighbouring countries around her. Let me assure you that in the eyes of many people in Asia, Indian intentions are suspect, and the Indian image as a peace-loving nation has been destroyed. You have referred, Mr. President, to press comments in Pakistan. While we have endeavoured to restrain expression of extremist views in our newspapers, it is not possible to interfere with the freedom of the press which reflects the real sentiment of the people. It must be realized that opinion is gravely exercised by the new developments, as the result of arms to India more so, as India continues to pose a serious threat to our security. I am afraid it is going to be extremely difficult for my government to discount public opinion. With kind regards, yours sincerely, signed, Mohammad Ayub Khan. The New York Times carried a dispatch in its issue of October 31, 1962, on President Kennedy's letter to me. The dispatch indicated that the letter was sent to me at the same time as President Kennedy sent a letter to Mr. Nehru, assuring him of United States support and sympathy in his country's battle against China. The dispatch further said that United States officials are said to be aware of Pakistan's misgivings about any increase in India's military potential, but it is the hope in Washington that Marshal Ayub's government will understand the motives of American military aid. It is also hoped here that the Pakistanis will not make any new move now in their long-standing dispute with India over Kashmir. On the same day, the Washington Post editorial suggested that, rude as the Indian awakening has been, it is not yet clear that the great Asian power is fully alert to its peril. while it casts about for military resources to meet the Chinese onslaught, it still has not felt sufficiently endangered to draw upon military strength immediately at hand. While its military forces engaging the Chinese fall back because they are outnumbered and ill-equipped, the bulk of the powerful Indian army faces the Pakistan frontier, immobilized, tied down, sterile. There is no help that the Western world can give the subcontinent that would be as useful as the help that India and Pakistan could give themselves by settling the quarrel over Kashmir. There was a section of the US press that warned the US administration of the danger of blindly giving arms aid to India. The Philadelphia Inquirer wrote editorially on October 30, 1962. Nevertheless, there is good reason not to rush in blindly, handing out large we can aid afford or weapons which might shortly be turned about and aimed at the free world. This country has already given India billions of dollars worth of economic aid, while that country, starting in 1947 with Junagadh and Kashmir, engaged in a long list of military adventures against weaker peoples, conquest of Goa being only the latest. In none of these cases did India call upon the United Nations or permit the peoples involved to voice their personal desires through plebiscite. Pakistan, one victim of Indian policy, is now understandably alarmed at the idea of massive gifts of arms to its neighbor. Prime Minister Nehru's reputed desire to pay for the weapons should be encouraged insofar as it is not an excuse to continue on a path of aggression, in the name of non-alignment or so-called neutrality. Our ambassador to the United States had a meeting with a State Department official, on October 2, 1962. He inquired about the kind of arms aid the Indians had asked for from the United States. He was told that the Indians had not yet specified their requirements for arms, but that Mr. Nehru had seen Ambassador Galbraith in New Delhi that very morning, and had asked him for United States arms aid against China. Ambassador Galbraith, on the authority of the United States government, had informed Mr. Nehru that the United States would give arms aid to India, and that it was for Mr. Nehru to indicate his requirements. The United States had already agreed to stand aside in the matter of priority for 2 Caribou transport aircraft the Indians wanted to acquire from the Canadians. Our ambassador recalled the assurance given by President Kennedy to me that Pakistan would be consulted before any decision was taken on the question of giving arms to India. Obviously, the United States government had ignored 2 very important points: that their decision to give arms aid to India was arrived at without prior consultation with Pakistan, and it was communicated to India before it was communicated to Pakistan. The ambassador expressed the hope that Pakistan would be consulted before decisions were taken regarding the terms and volume of aid and the type of equipment to be supplied to India. He was told that military aid might be provided to India either under lend-lease against payment in local currency or against deferred payment. It was conveyed to our ambassador that the United States was anxious to act without any loss of time. They regarded the Chinese move as the biggest since Korea. In Korea, the US decision had been taken with great rapidity, and the same speed was necessary to meet the present situation. The Indians had taken 5 years to wake up to the Chinese reality, and their illusions had now been shattered. The United States was anxious to give full support to India, subject, of course, to receiving suitable assurances that the arms would be used only against China. In another meeting in the State Department, the following day, our ambassador was informed that a specific request for arms aid had been received from Mr. Nehru. The request consisted of 2 lists. One contained items for delivery over a period of 120 days, and the other contained items which were required immediately and would be airlifted. The equipment was to be given to the Indians for rupees, which would be deposited in a fund and used as in the case of the PL 480 program. A provision was also being worked out for a waiver for the initial shipment. The requirements indicated by the Indians were intended to meet the specific combat situation, plus related reserves. The United States' aim was to provide immediately material to stiffen Indian combat capability. Our ambassador was advised that the US arms would not be used by India against Pakistan, and that he should take the United States' word for it. He was also told that Pakistan need have no anxiety regarding a situation of imbalance developing in the subcontinent as a result of the supply of arms to India. He was advised that Pakistan should forget the past and make a gesture of goodwill and cooperation towards India. Such a gesture would make a tremendous impact on India, and her attitude would undoubtedly soften towards Pakistan. And who knew that this might not lead to a satisfactory solution of the Kashmir problem? That, in brief, was the American point of view. It was obvious that the United States had decided to give long-term arms assistance to India, apart from providing emergency relief. It was also clear that while the United States wanted to see an amicable settlement of the Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan, they were not prepared to use their full influence directly, lest India should feel that she was being subjected to pressure. The US attitude, in fact, was that India should have all sympathy and support, and that Pakistan would be well advised not to raise any difficulties. Mr. Nehru wrote me a letter on October 27, 1962, in which he gave me his version of the dispute that had arisen between India and China, on the question of border demarcation. I sent him the following reply on 5 November. It is a matter of great regret to us that this dispute should have led to intensified military activities and induction of new war potential, thus endangering the peace and stability of the region in which Pakistan is vitally concerned. I agree with you when you say that no effort should be spared to eliminate deceit and force from international relations. In this respect, I am constrained to point out that various outstanding disputes between India and Pakistan can also be resolved amicably should the government of India decide to apply these principles with sincerity and conviction. We in Pakistan are pledged to a policy of peace and friendly relations with all neighboring countries, especially India. We have accepted this course for we believe this is the only method through which we can pursue the gigantic tasks of economic and industrial development, which must be carried forward in the interest of the prosperity and well-being of the people. Mr. Harold Macmillan sent me a message through his High Commissioner on October 25, 1962. A few days later I received a similar message from the Australian Prime Minister, Mr. R.G. Menzies. To both of them I replied in very much the same terms as I had replied to Mr. Kennedy's letter, repeating especially my reasoned belief that the Chinese were not undertaking a full-scale military invasion of India. I was hoping that the Western countries would take our point of view into account before embarking on large-scale supplies of arms to India, but it seemed that in their anxiety to rush to help her with arms and ammunition, they were neither willing to accommodate us nor to take the long-term view of the serious imbalance which their action would create in the subcontinent. There was a definite attempt, I think, to panic India into believing that there was going to be an attack by China, with 25 to 30 divisions through Burma and over Tibet. Mr. Nehru, who had started talking about a long fight with China, convinced himself that a Chinese invasion was inevitable. It suited him to talk about such a possibility. How much interference there was from Delhi in the conduct of the battles I cannot say, but such interference is always fatal. A commander in the field must be carefully chosen, then given his task and left alone to carry it out in the manner he considers best. General Cowell, the Indian Army commander on the northeastern front, was a supply and transport officer, and had no experience of serious fighting. An Indian brigade was put right out on the forward slopes of the Sela Pass, in full view of the Chinese. No experienced commander would have done such a thing. The Chinese made a frontal demonstration against this brigade and then went round it. Cowell panicked and ordered the rear brigade to move forward in support. When tills happened, the Chinese made a second encircling movement, and got into the trenches that the rear brigade had left. When the rear brigade found they could not break through the cordon of Chinese surrounding the forward brigade, they turned about in an attempt to return to their original dispositions. They found to their utter astonishment their trenches occupied by the Chinese. They broke to avoid destruction, and in the meantime, the Chinese made another encircling movement, and entered the plains of Assam, where the civil population fled in panic. By this time the Indian Army itself was on the run, and had ceased to be a fighting force. Given better leadership, correct dispositions and reserves held for counter-attacks on the flanks, the results might not have been so disastrous. The Chinese fought most skillfully under brilliant leadership. Of course they are much tougher people than the Indians and are used to soldiering in that climate. The mere fact of living in Tibet at a height of about 18,000 feet is a great advantage, but the fact remains that despite this talk of 25 to 30 Chinese divisions, which was nothing but a figment of Indo-US imagination, The Chinese had no more than 6 to 7 light divisions in the entire area, and in the limited area of Nefa they brought to bear against the Indian army not more than 1 or 1.5 divisions in any given sector. Yet, fighting with remarkable skill, they made rings round the Indians. But let me not denigrate the Indian soldiers, for some of them are as good as any in the world. They were badly served. Had they been better led, they would have given a more satisfactory account of themselves. Part 4. The Indians believed that they would soon be facing a full-fledged invasion by China. In this view they were encouraged by the United States. The result was the arms rush, of formidable magnitude. The United States thought that all that need be done for Pakistan in consideration of past understanding and alliance was to give some kind of an assurance that their arms would not be used against Pakistan, and to prepare the ground for direct talks between India and Pakistan to resolve the Kashmir dispute. The public assurance came in the form of a State Department release. On November 17, 1962, the Department of State released today the text of exchange of notes concerning the provision of defense assistance by the Government of the United States of America to the Government of India. In the exchange of notes, it is stated that the assistance will be furnished for the purpose of defense against outright Chinese communist aggression now facing India. In 1954, when the United States decided to extend military aid to Pakistan, the government of India was assured that if our aid to any country, including Pakistan, was misused and directed against another in aggression, the United States would undertake immediately, in accordance with constitutional authority, appropriate action both within and without the United Nations, to thwart such aggression. The government of the United States of America has similarly assured the government of Pakistan that, if our assistance to India should be misused and directed against another in aggression, the United States would undertake immediately, in accordance with constitutional authority, appropriate action both within and without the United Nations to thwart such aggression. Needless to say, in giving these assurances, the United States is confident that neither of the countries which it is aiding harbors aggressive designs. President Kennedy himself issued a statement on November 2, 1962, saying, "In providing military assistance to India, we are mindful of our alliance with Pakistan. All of our aid is for the purpose to defeat Chinese communist subversion. Our help to India in no way diminishes or qualifies our commitment to Pakistan, and we have made it clear to both governments as well. In arranging direct talks between India and Pakistan, Mr. Duncan Sandys, then Secretary of State for Commonwealth Relations in the UK government, and Mr. Averell Hammond, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Far Eastern Affairs, played a significant role." The following joint statement was issued by the Government of India and the Government of Pakistan over the signatures of Nehru and myself, on November 29, 1962. The President of Pakistan and the Prime Minister of India have agreed that a renewed effort should be made to resolve the outstanding differences between their two countries on Kashmir and other related matters, so as to enable India and Pakistan to live side by side in peace and friendship. In consequence, they have decided 10 start discussions at an early date with the object of reaching an honorable and equitable settlement. These will be conducted initially at the ministerial level. At the appropriate stage, direct talks will be held between Mr. Nehru and President Ayub. Signed, M. Khan, J. L. Nehru, FM, November 29, 2062. 7:10 p.m. Hardly had the joint statement been signed, when Nehru made some observations in the Lok Sabha, which strengthened my doubts about his intention to enter into any meaningful and constructive talks about the Kashmir dispute. Mr. Duncan Sandys was shown the text of Nehru's observations on 30 November, when he arrived in Karachi from New Delhi, on his way back to London. He was so surprised that he decided to fly back to Delhi to clear the matter up. From the airport he drove straight to the Prime Minister's house, and caught Nehru as he was going to bed. Nehru first tried to show that he did not seem to understand what all the fuss was about. He said that he had made his statement as he always did, without a prepared text. His remarks had been made in answer to a question of which he had had little notice, about a rumour on the BBC, which suggested that the idea of partitioning Kashmir was already under discussion. He added that it was wrong to read too much into particular phrases. He did not like the idea of making any statement which could be interpreted as a retraction. However, at Mr. Duncan Sanders' suggestion, he agreed that some statement might be worked out which, while not involving any eating of words, would put a more favourable construction on what he had said, and would help to allay some other doubts which his statement in the Lok Sabha had aroused. The result was the following statement by Nehru, on December 1, 1962. There has never been any question of preconditions, or of any restrictions on the scope of the talks, which the two governments are initiating. As I indicated yesterday in the Lok Sabha, the problem of Kashmir is complicated and difficult. But I am aware that with goodwill on both sides it should be possible to work out an honourable and equitable solution of this, as of other problems. In the meantime, Nehru had sent another urgent request for military assistance to the United States. 12 C-130 military transport planes were sent to India by the United States on November 20, 1962. Further assistance in the form of mountain warfare equipment followed. The planes were to be used for transporting supplies within the Indian territories, and would perform priority tasks in connection with the formation of fresh defensive positions by the Indians in the Nefer area. The military situation looked dismal from the Indian point of view at that time. The Chinese were moving rapidly at both ends of the valley in the Nefer area. Major parts of the Indian forces in the Nefer area, 1 to 1.5 divisions, had been rendered ineffective. It appeared that the Chinese might take Tezpur, Jorhat and Digboy. A high-level team comprising officials from the Pentagon and the State Department, and a representative of the White House came to India in the third week of November, to assist the U.S. Embassy there in assessing Indian needs, and to advise on relevant policy considerations. The American assessment at that time was that if the Chinese moved into India beyond the disputed territory, the conflict would no longer remain only India's business, it would become something more than that. It was in this situation that Nehru had signed the joint statement under which India and Pakistan were to make renewed efforts to resolve the Kashmir dispute. Within weeks of the unilateral declaration of a ceasefire by China, the Indian attitude changed completely, and the talks, which had never held much promise, got bogged down in procedural wrangles and academic inanities. President Kennedy and Prime Minister Macmillan intimated to me the extent of the arms they were supplying to India. I wrote to President Kennedy on January 2, 1963, "Only a speedy and just Kashmir settlement can give us any assurance that the contemplated increase of India's military power is not likely to be deployed against Pakistan in future. I agree completely with your judgment that no single step could contribute as much to the security of the subcontinent as the resolution of the Kashmir problem." Despite the discouraging and provocative utterances of Mr. Nehru on the subject, we are pursuing our sincere efforts to negotiate with India a solution which would meet three requirements: respect of the wishes of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, protection of the vital interests of Pakistan, and due regard for such claims of India as can be considered legitimate. It is only with reference to these three basic criteria that a correct judgment can be made as to the one-sidedness or others vice of the intransigence which India is very likely to show in the negotiations. To Prime Minister Harold Macmillan I wrote on the same day: "My dear Prime Minister, I thank you for your message of December 24th. Sir Maurice James has also explained to me the extent of the military assistance which you and President Kennedy have decided at your Nassau meeting to extend to India. The extent of the military assistance which Britain and the United States have decided to extend to India for the present without making it contingent on a Kashmir settlement gives us cause for great concern. The Nassau decision, based on the assessment of your military experts, may seem, in the context of your global strategy, to be the minimum aid necessary to enable India to defend itself from an attack through Nefer and Ladakh. We, on the other hand, find it hard to believe that any invasion of the subcontinent is likely to occur from these directions. And consequently the quantum of military support to India, quantitative, as well as qualitative, which you will be extending is fraught with serious consequences to the maintenance of the present ratio of military strength in the subcontinent, and hence to the security of Pakistan. I have always held the view that the most effective way of safeguarding the security of the subcontinent is through a disengagement of the armed forces of the two countries. A Kashmir settlement will assure to both the substance of disengagement Without a settlement, sizable military aid to India is more likely to be deployed against Pakistan than for the defense of the northeast, or the western sectors of India's frontier with China. We have kept the British High Commissioner informed of the talks that took place a few days ago, at the level of ministers in Rawalpindi. This meeting was purely exploratory. The real test of India's intentions regarding Kashmir will come in the next ministerial meeting in New Delhi, about the middle of January. Pakistan's attitude will not be rigid. I have instructed my delegation to be guided by 3 basic principles in its approach towards possible solutions that may be discussed. I. Whether the solution is likely to be acceptable to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Whether it safeguards the vital interests of Pakistan and T. Whether it meets the legitimate claims of India. I have no illusions that any formula which satisfies these 3 requirements will not be beset with difficulties, but if India sincerely desires an end to the dispute, and given goodwill on both sides, there is no reason why the 2 countries should not be able, with the assistance of Britain and the United States, to reach an equitable and honorable settlement within the next month or 2. Public opinion in Pakistan is such that while I am willing to exercise due patience, I will find it extremely difficult to convince the people of the virtue of this quality, if one round of discussion after another docks no, open the way to a solution. I remain convinced that the key to a just and peaceful settlement lies with you and President Kennedy. If the flow of your arms supply is so regulated as to influence India to be in a more amenable frame of mind, positive results are bound to follow from negotiations now underway. With best wishes for your health, happiness and prosperity in the new year, yours sincerely, signed, Mohammad Ayub Khan. I recall that during this period the Chinese ambassador called on me one morning. This was after China had declared the ceasefire. He had been instructed to convey to me that inspired statements were being made in certain quarters to create doubts in the minds of Pakistanis about the Chinese attitude towards the Kashmir settlement. He assured me that the Chinese government would be very glad if an honorable settlement were to be reached between India and Pakistan. I do not have to go over the details of the negotiations which followed between India and Pakistan. It was the same old story. The Indians were playing for time. They had been able to secure a great deal of arms aid from the West, and a joint statement promising talks on Kashmir did not seem too big a price to them. We had known all along that without direct U.S. interest India would not budge an inch, but the United States thought that in existing circumstances, a direct U.S. role in the talks would not be productive. The great opportunity which history had offered for a settlement of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute was thus lost. Once the United States and other Western countries had decided that they would not link arms aid to India with a settlement of the Kashmir dispute, the Indians were under no compulsion to enter into any serious discussion with Pakistan. I had a meeting with General Maxwell Taylor in December 1963. He mentioned the American desire to station a nuclear task force in the Indian Ocean. I said that the USA was free to do what it liked on the high seas, but I could not understand what military or political advantage they would get from such a move. They were in a position to achieve their objectives from their existing locations. Where was the need to add another element of tension in the Indian Ocean littoral? Politically the move would be most unpopular, and countries in Africa and Asia would strongly resent it. So far as Pakistan was concerned, such a force would only add to her problems and encourage India to act in an even more irresponsible manner. There was at that time, as I have mentioned, a bilateral arrangement between the USA and Pakistan, under which the USA was to come to Pakistan's assistance, should the latter be subjected to attack from any quarter. On several occasions, proposals were made by the USA to fly out a task force to Pakistan. We wanted to know whether such a force would carry out a contingency plan with us, in which our combined forces would have a definite role to play. The Americans would not agree to this. All they wanted was to demonstrate to us their ability to fly out to Pakistan from far-off bases. In this we were not interested. Since they did not agree to participate in the kind of exercise we had suggested, we felt that no useful purpose would be served by having a US task force come to Pakistan for any exercise. By this time, it was becoming clear to us that in the event of India attacking us, it was most unlikely that the USA would honor its commitment and come to our assistance.